And we're starting. Very good. Hello, everyone. Today is St. Patrick's Day. It's a special day. And people might be wearing green. It's beautiful outside and sunny and pretty warm. So hopefully you've enjoyed yourself today. Oh, you're showing green. Okay, Tina, I've got green too. Yep, I'm ready. But today for the meeting, I'm wearing a plain solid color. I did want, the meeting is starting at 6:05, so we'll record that. And I'm welcoming everyone here. Thank you for coming. The meeting, first we have like a short business meeting. It'll be under 30 minutes. And the rest of the time will be devoted to the board orientation. There are a lot of new members this year, and it helps for folks to understand about what the Rhode Island Commission does, its history as an organization, just to get that background information so that you're up to speed. So hopefully the business meeting will be kept very short. I'm wondering if anyone has a public comment that wants to make a statement prior to us starting the actual meeting. And if you want to make a comment, please write it in the chat asking to make a comment and I'll recognize you. I'm not seeing anyone saying, so let's move forward then with the official meeting. We have the ASL interpreter and we have captioning. You can click on the CC box at the bottom if you want captioning. If you want to make a public comment, the chat is not for public comments. The chat is to request a public comment. Then I would recognize you. You would open up your video and, Betsy Beach is here. Okay, our secretary. Hi, Betsy. So I'm going to open the meeting with the minutes from the meeting in February 17th, 2021, last month. You can just review it, and if there's any edits or corrections, if not, I'd like to hear a motion to accept it as written. Bethany, if you could make it a little bigger, it's still pretty tiny print. It's still small. Yes, good. Thank you. It's a little better. Okay, so people can read along. So as people have read it, if there are no corrections, could I have a motion to accept it as written? And if you want to speak, again, open your video. Yes, Tina?
I make a motion that we accept the minutes as written.
Okay. Any second? Anyone seconding?
I'll second. Caroline Albrecht. I second.
Great, Caroline seconding. So if we could all open our videos and just do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or if you're abstaining. I see 8. Okay, 8. And then me, obviously. Approving it. Okay, thank you. Then that motion passes. Before we move forward with the business meeting, I did forget one important part about this meeting. We always talk about introducing who is here. We just had a vote. There were 8 commissioners. And I need to formally recognize who the commissioners are so that I can say that we have formally made the quorum, satisfied the quorum. So we have Tim Riker, and I'm the chair of the meeting. We have Bunmi Osho. She's one of the commissioners. Betsy Beach, she's the secretary for the commission. Caroline Obrecht, vice chair of the commission. David Maloney, one of the commissioners. Drew Balsley, commissioner. Let's see. Oh, Kimberly Marthers, one of the commissioners. Tina Nelson, commissioner. So that's 8. We have staff here from the Rhode Island Commission office, including Ernest Covington III, who's the executive director, Bethany Link, who helps run these meetings. She's the tech person behind the scenes. Christine West, the Healthcare System Transformation Project, HSTP. Holly St. Pierre, interpreter referral. I think Lindsay Conway is here. She's an assistant under contract to work with Ernest for general access. Pam Zellner, she's the program manager, the commission. Mike Baer, he's the Emergency Communication Access Program, EPCAP. We have interpreters here tonight. We have car reporting available to provide captioning. And we also have a consultant whose name is Shane Feldman. He's representing Innovi Strategies, which is helping, he'll run the end of the meeting related to the board orientation. So thank you all for coming tonight. It's St. Patrick's Day. It was a beautiful day today. Now, back to the agenda. If you could show that agenda again, Bethany, thank you. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is unfinished business, things that we might have brought up from the last meeting that hadn't gotten done. We did have some interested members who wanted to join the ad hoc interpreter referral committee. There's one person who was appointed from the Rhode Island Hearing Loss Association of America, RICDHH. And that person will work on the committee. It's Ann McDonald. And the second person is from the general public as a consumer of interpreter services, but also is involved a lot in advocacy, the Tri-County Action Committee. That's not correct. TRCA, Tri-County Action Committee. And that's Amy Slezak. So those are two people. And what I would like to ask the board to make a motion to approve those two members, and that will complete the committee. We'll have 7 members on the committee. And it meets the requirements for a committee that the state has set up. If a commissioner could bring a motion to the table, thank you. And you can open your camera, obviously, if you're going to say something. Yes, Drew? Yes, I move to have both of those members approved for the ad hoc interpreter referral committee. Can I hear a second? Kimmy? Oh, all right. I see both Kimmy and Tina. You both popped up, but I'll give it to Kimmy. Okay, thank you. Kimmy seconds. And again, I'll ask everybody to open their video. Wait. Before I do that, we need to have, I should ask for, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. We should ask for a discussion. We can have an open discussion if anybody wants to discuss anything about those two members being approved for the committee. If you do want to make a comment, please open your video. And if not, we can go to the vote. We can close the question. I'm giving it a count of 3. All right, now if everybody could open their video and show me thumbs up or thumbs down, or if you're abstaining. Let me count the commissioners who are voting. I see 7 ayes. And Bunmi, yep, thumbs up. All right, very good. Everybody has voted aye. So the motion passes. Is anyone opposed or abstaining? I think we only have 8 here, so obviously there's no opposition or abstention. Great. And Bethany, if you could bring back the agenda, we can move on to the next item. Thank you. Okay, so new business. We have 3 items. The third item is actually more about potential, any concerns that might happen around COVID. The first item is, it says, discuss and approve the executive director's outside activity as a board member on an organization. So Ernest, I can let Ernest himself speak and give some information about what he's asking for the board to approve. If you wouldn't mind opening your screen, Ernest, and speaking about that a little more. Thank you. Ernest is saying, yes, hold on.
So we have 3 different things. The first one, there's a healthcare access board, and they've asked me to join their board to discuss issues that relate to deaf and hard of hearing people accessing. And it's a very large group. But up to this point, there've been a lot of different executive directors that have gone on boards, but there's never been an executive director that has been on this particular board. There's always been hearing people on this board only. So this would be a first time, but I did want to check with you if it's okay with you if I join this board with the understanding that it is not related to deaf people specifically. It's related to just general access And if you at the Rhode Island Commission feel that that is something that I can do, there's no conflict of interest that is seen across the board, then I think it would just only be a benefit. But if there's any other state agency or anything else, of course, I would not join, because that would be a conflict of interest, but this is a nonprofit. So if you are comfortable with me joining this nonprofit board, or any other nonprofit boards, this is the first one that I've been asked to, and I would like to join just to be a representative of the Rhode Island Commission, just to learn about information regarding healthcare access as a whole across Rhode Island and be a part of that discussion and ideas. But I'm opening it up to get your feedback regarding that. What was the name of the organization? Is it in Rhode Island? It's the Healthcare Board, Access Board in the Rhode Island. Yes, it's specifically in Rhode Island. Do any commissioners have any questions regarding this? If not, I guess we can move to a motion if there's no questions. If you feel that this is something that I would be allowed to do to join various nonprofit boards, just let me know. Not seeing any. So not seeing any questions about this. I'm wondering if the organization has a website. Yes, it does. I'm definitely could email that to you later. I'm happy to do that. So if the board, someone on the board would like to make a motion. Not seeing anyone. Would anyone make a motion? Boonmi? It looks like you're saying something, Boonmi.
No, I just want to suggest that team do more research on it before we vote on it, because we don't want anything that would tarnish the image of this board. And there's a lot out there that we don't know about. So maybe we should hold off until next meeting.
Okay. So thank you, Boonmi. Tim is saying. Betsy, you have a comment?
I'm just wondering if Ernest knows how much time commitment this is. Is it joining the board and the committees, or is it just a few times a year? Do you know what the time commitment is?
I'm planning to join just a few times a year. I'm not trying to bring myself to the place of being overwhelmed with things. But healthcare access to me is a vital issue, and it definitely relates to so many things. And being that it's a nonprofit, I don't plan on joining that organization and going further in depth, but just being a part. So how many times a year does the board meeting meet? Is it annual? 4 times a year? Okay. Maybe the board, as was suggested, you could share some more information, the website of the organization, maybe a couple other details. Sure, Ernest is saying. Carolyn Oberg, did you have something?
Well, I agree with Boonmi that I would like to see who is on this board, because as Boonmi says, there are organizations who are all different points of view. So I'd like to see if these people have any agenda.
I see, yeah. So it seems at this point, no one is going to make a motion at this meeting. So we could suggest that you would share the website. Yeah, I can do that. And any other details with the commissioners, just to make sure that we will put it on the agenda at the next meeting so that people can feel more comfortable. And then at that point, we can have further questions and maybe make a motion. Yeah, thank you so much for this discussion about me joining the board. So the next thing I wanted to say specifically about our 4 committees. we have the Tech Access Committee and Relay. So there's one that has absolutely no members. So it's been really hard to recruit people. So I'm wondering, just readjusting my camera here. The Tech Access Committee, it's very similar, in similar requirements to have on that committee, but we don't have anyone there. So I'm wondering if people who are responsible for the Tech Access Committee and others would be able, maybe Tina and Carolyn, you could think of ways of merging some of these, and we could talk to some legal, get some legal counsel on how we can look at the requirements and what we could do for some of the committee requirements. And I know that there's some that can't be merged for legal reasons, some that could. So getting some information further on that so that we could plan a committee for 2 hours that would focus specifically on those issues. So we could talk to people who are already on one board that might be able to meet the requirements of the relay service or other tech services. So I know that people who there might be already 6 on a committee and you just need 7. Maybe they'd have a 1-hour meeting of one committee, and then the next committee would be another hour. So that they both could happen at the same meeting. So there'd be 2 different agendas. And once one meeting was done, then I could talk about the relay service committee. I know that a lot of people in the other committee, it's a lot of the same people who would be, so I don't think we would need to do a lot of the same conversation, but if we quickly move from one committee to the next and use a lot of the same people, it's just a suggestion that I would have, and see how you feel about that. So we would share the 2 committees together. The agendas would be different, but the meetings could be at the same time. Betsy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think the employment committee has several people who are pretty expert in tech access. The chair of the employment committee has done the adaptive telephone program for the state for many, many years. And then there's some people there at ORS on that committee who know a lot about tech. I wonder if, I don't know if do we have to have a separate committee? Can we say we're meeting as the employment/tech committee? Can we somehow make the law? No. I mean, 2 meetings in a row is a lot of hours, but personally, I think the employment committee people would be good at tech access. I'll just say that.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. That's why I was trying to see if we could find, we can't find any more people for that, but looking, if some people are willing, we could potentially plan next week at the committee, if there's interest, that we could service both committees, at one time, doing 1 hour of each. So if there's interest in that, just if there's interest. Carolyn?
And I'm thinking about the healthcare committee. I don't know if this is exactly tech access, but we certainly talk a lot about having to use video relay interpreters in healthcare settings. So does that count as tech access? Could that somehow be merged into a tech access meeting? Talking about those kind of issues?
No, I think really the TRS focuses more specifically on new technology, whether it's adaptive phones, or loaning phone programs, or even specialized programs, making sure we get the word out to people about technology, whether it be, things that maybe an Android would translate voice to text. Just really looking at new technology that people could use. That would be more for the TRS program. I think it's not exactly, it doesn't really mesh well with the healthcare committee. So I think it's more focused on specific new technology.
Well, so as you're talking and clarifying for me, thank you. I do think it might mesh with the needs of some hard of hearing people who use some of the voice to text technology on their phones. And so in that sense, we could use that in the healthcare setting. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's a fit, I think.
Yeah, Tim? So I think we have to look at the legal requirements to setting up a committee and looking, we don't want to have to change the law to do this. There might be some of those legal requirements, right? There might be the requirement of 4. So are there any further questions or comments for Ernest regarding this? I'll put a hold on it, the TRS, the tech committee, and we can have further discussion next week. If people are feeling comfortable with that, then, we can talk about it further at the next meeting. But if people aren't, then we can continue to try to look for and recruit some other people for the committee. I think the commission already did approve for us to move ahead with the committee. But finding a list of people and names who would be involved in that committee is where we're at now. So once we have that list of names, we could approve to start it. But I think we're not exactly looking at merging, but, still finding, we need to find similar people, like a public representative, someone who has a tech. We already have that on the TEL committee of, they might be able to do double service, be on 2 different committees. So we could just meet back to back so that we could use their service in 2 committees. Okay, so I think we'll discuss it further at the next meeting. Yes, yeah. Okay, are there any further questions before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, so we're moving on to the 3rd. Sure, go ahead. All right. So vaccination and COVID, I've been working with that a lot with Mike Bear and a lot of other people as well. Pam and Bethany and Lindsay and Holly. We've been having a lot of discussion, particularly around vaccination and providing access to the deaf and hard of hearing, and specifically receiving vaccination. And Mike Bear's been working a lot with getting information out, accessible to the public about vaccination. So we've been working on providing interpreters at different sites, whether it would be VRI, potentially on device, or some live interpreters present on site. Another option would be, well, there's a number of different options of providing access. So we've been working on those and trying to work out some of the details with that with the Department of Health, and which site would be best for deaf and hard of hearing people to access for that communication access. Because I know there's a lot have had struggle going to sites and with the questions that are provided, and they don't have access to the information during that intake. So we've been talking about that frustration that the public has been feeling. And, of course, there's 2 doses of the vaccine. So we've been working with the Department of Health, trying to work out some of those details, setting up interpreters and making sure we could get the word out about where there would be an accessible location. And Mike Bear has been working on that a lot, as well as Pam and Bethany and Lindsay and Holly have been working on really trying to get that information out so that people are aware of the process. It's been taken a lot of time, and we've been really keeping up with a number of meetings because of that. And if we really do get to work things out, we want to be able to let various deaf and hard of hearing organizations know, those that focus on the deaf and hard of hearing, assisting them, how we can get this information out to your members and clients about the vaccine and where interpreters would be provided, where there would be accessible communication. So the Department of Health is concerned specifically about the numbers. If there are low turnout, they want to know, if there's like 500 to 1,000 people coming for a vaccine, they would prefer to do that at once. But of course, the deaf and hard of hearing community, you could have like 50 people come there. So they really want to gauge the level of interest and numbers and how many people would be coming to a particular site that they would have interpreters and access at. So we're hoping at this point in the near future to get something a little bit better out, but we are continuing to work on that. Mike Bear, Pam, Bethany, Holly, Lindsay, myself, we're all working on this project. And once something is ready, we will let the commissioners here know, and we'll also be contacting several different organizations to get the word out about how to register online, or how they're going to call to make an appointment. So we're working on presenting all this information in a way that would be accessible. Okay, due to the time, I think we're going to have to turn this over pretty quickly to orientation. But are there any further questions before we move ahead with orientation? Mike, Bear? Thank you. Hi, everyone. Ernest, a really great summary there of everything that's going on. I feel like we have a great relationship with the Department of Health. And what Ernest has been saying is that, we've been meeting with them on some various issues, specific issues. Like, for example, I'm very happy that the Department of Health has really been listening to our suggestions and taking them regarding vaccine sites. They've already decided that we'll have a meeting this Friday to finalize it. So I can't give all the information, but there definitely will be an interpreter at the Cranston site. We've suggested that there would be 4 ASL interpreters and 4 CDIs. So they would all be able to pair up as a team, and they would be on a regular schedule. So it might be every Tuesday or every Saturday. So hopefully we'll do 1 weekday and 1 weekend day, so that deaf people know which days there will be an interpreter. So then we will be hopefully booking, and I know the deaf community is anxious for that, and some of them would even struggle with the registration with the English. So we also want to set up a private link that is specifically for the deaf and hard of hearing community to register. And once that is ready, then we want to send that only to our community. We don't want this link getting out, just to Rhode Island, in general. We want it to be a place where the deaf and hard of hearing can register specifically for vaccine doses. So we want to see, 200 in a week. So we want to gauge the interest. We want to see 200 on a weekday, 200 on a weekend. We don't want to see the interest too low. So we are trying to gauge interest, make sure that we market this well so that everyone is aware. There's a number of other smaller issues that I'm not going to detail at this point, but just know that everything's going well and that everything seems to be going in our favor here. And also regarding the vaccine, that we're going to loan them 5 iPads. And the reason is because not everyone needs an interpreter. Some people might need the speech to text, there might be hard of hearing, they might need live captioning. And so we're going to set up also VRI on those and connect with Purple. So it just for the surface conversations, but that wouldn't be used for more in-depth medical conversations because there are live interpreters present. But the VRI would be there just to make sure that there is access to accessibility for all. So there's a number of other things I could detail, but thank you so much, Ernest. Yeah, thank you, Mike Bear. Thank you. So I think this is a good time. Oh, Drew, I just have a quick question. Mike Bear and Ernest, thank you so much. And with that relationship with the Department of Health. But I think that I know they're not as interested if the numbers are small, but there are people who work with the deaf and hard of hearing community. I know the online, they might not need it, but You might also be able to talk to those who work with the deaf and hard of hearing community perspectives and others who would go with the deaf person and get vaccinated at the same time with deaf clients, maybe even family members, because it's hard for them to communicate. So they'd be able to also get a vaccine around the same time. That, I don't know if they're flexible with that. They might be flexible with the phases, and they would be willing to adapt to that. Mike speaking. So your suggestion, I will definitely add that to Deaf Plus workers. I think to invite more groups, they wouldn't be happy to that. But the good news would be, I did talk with them that we're going to respect their phase process. And they said that for us, because of the communication access, they're going to waive that. Oh, really? Yeah. They said that they're not concerned with the number of people, the age range. They want to see that numbers. And I know they've seen other places where it's been successful. And so they realize, because it's a communication access issue, they are going to waive that. And so, but there are some people that were really struggling with VRI because of the communication. So, and we're having issues, and they were starting to recognize that, and that some that refuse to provide VRI services because of the vaccine being like, so, you know, if you're going to test it for a simple conversation, just a test, COVID test, there's very little communication that happens. So VRI was more successful there, but with a vaccine and deeper communication, it was not accessible. So it says that interpreters have a right also to stop if something goes too in depth with VRI, as we were talking to Purple. But I really like your suggestion, Drew, that it be Deaf Plus and some workers as well. Thank you. Thank you, Drew.
Tim is saying, I think we're finished with that agenda item. That's the new business. So thank you. Thanks everybody who participated in that part. And I know we're a little over time. So we have so much to do for the rest of the meeting as well with the orientation. So I just want to move forward in my chair role. I will turn that over to Shane Feldman. He's the consultant who's all right. Thank you, Ernest. So I'll reduce my video and then you can pick it up from there, Ernest. Betsy. You're muted still.
Okay, in my secretary role, I just want to, the name of the second interpreter with the blue background before we get involved in something else, before I forget to ask. So I can put it
Oh,
in
it's
the minutes.
Shauna. It's SHAUNA, and the last name is Jehle, JEHLE. Shauna.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shauna.
Great, thanks, Betsy, for clarifying that. So I have a PowerPoint for the orientation, and I'm going to be doing it in a little different way. I can sign actually on the PowerPoint, but if you feel like as the slides are moving forward that you do not understand and it's not working, we can go back to the old way where I'm side by side with the shared PowerPoint. But let's try this other technique where I'm using the PowerPoint as a virtual background. And that way, the PowerPoints can be shown in sequence and we're not having to look around to see who's signing and where the PowerPoint slide is showing. That way you can keep your eye gaze in one place. But if it becomes an issue and it's not clear, please let me know and we'll change techniques. So I'm going to start that now with me using the slide as a virtual background. So then I'll reduce my video over here. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to look at the PowerPoints now for the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing from March of 2021, the orientation. And this is based on the commission's public hearing laws, that we have to be able to have, we have to have a video recording, we have to have the information for the governor. And some people had asked me, how, now that there's an executive order that the governor has put out, whether we'll continue to have virtual meetings, and we don't know until that changes. So just so that you understand what we're going to be covering, we've got the history, the mission statement, the vision statement, guiding principles, legislative mandates, and the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing organizational structure. Then we're going to be talking about the department's history and the roles and program summaries. And I'll turn that over to the people who work in those departments. Interpreter referral. Sorry, information and referral. Interpreter referral. Emergency Preparedness and Communication Access Center, EPCAT. And the Healthcare System Transformation Project, HSTP. Those 4 speakers will show their own PowerPoints and go through that, those department by department. Once that is over, it'll come back to me and I will explain some information about the prior 2 years and the current fiscal year budgets, summary of sources, where we get our money from, the Open Meeting Act, and Access to Public Records Act, the Rhode Island Ethics and Financial Disclosure. And then we'll talk about next dates. And that is when Shane will take over to discuss briefly where we're going from here. And then there's a conclusion. So I want to talk a little about the history of the commission. We have only had 3 executive directors in our history. The first one was Marilyn Levine, and she was the director for 2 years, 1999 to 2001. She was not deaf. Then we had Stephen Florio. He was the director from 2002 to 2018. And then myself, starting in 2019. So we've only had 3, and it's over 20 years. I think that's good. The next slide. Okay. So the commission, you can look along the timeline here and get a sense of when things happened, when we were set up, what our mandate is. The first item is 1977, when the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing was created, but we had no funding. It was called the Commission on the Deaf and Hearing Impaired, HI. So that's interesting. Then over time, we get to 1987. 1983. They passed the bill Telephone Service for the Deaf. And it's now the Adaptive Telephone Equipment Loan Program, ATEL. And that's still happening. That one is still going since 1983. The next item is 1987. The budget was $1,000 just to pay for interpreters at CDHH meetings, but it was called CDHI at the time. The next item is from 1987. CDHI office at the Governor's Commission on Disabilities was set up. Basically, it was a file cabinet, and it was the 3rd drawer down on the main file cabinet. What that means is CDHI did not actually have an office. They ran meetings and collected information, minutes and things like that, and stored them in a file. If there were any concerns from the community, they were also stored in this file. You can see there's a picture at the bottom of the different people at a meeting. Over time, we get to 1990. We had a pilot program for interpreter referral services. That was the year that was established. And it's interesting because the commission was set up. And at that point, we had a task force to think about the commission, the new commission, and talk about what a Rhode Island commission would be like. People wanted to have something for the deaf and hard of hearing, because what they were finding out is that people were struggling and people were feeling like they weren't getting the services they needed. And they wanted to put it to the state, to the General Assembly legislature. And that was introduced in 1992 to restructure 1992 to restructure CDHI and form CDHH. And it was passed by the General Assembly. The next slide. So once it was established in 1992, we held the first meeting for the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, CDHH. Then the next year, 1993, they set up the statewide interpreter referral services. And there's a picture there below the timeline that shows the first interpreter referral. In 1999, CDHH finally brought on their first executive director. And after that same year, there was our 8th legislative mandate, coordinating council to implement strategic plan for deaf and hard of hearing children. That was added, and I can explain more about that later. That was 1999. In 2001, the total number of commissioners was increased to 13. Prior to that, it was smaller. So 2001, it's been 13 since then. In 2002, the first deaf executive director was hired, Steve Florio. You can see a picture there of him. And then in 2003, the statewide interpreter referral service moved in-house. So it was in the RICDHH office instead of an external organization running the referral. The next slide, please. In 2005, we set up the emergency interpreter referral service. And then 2006, the 9th legislative mandate was added to track the yearly services provided by exempted interpreters. Those are interpreters who were not within the state system. That was the final legislative mandate. There has been no addition since 2006. In 2009, there was a pilot program for communication access, real-time translation, CART reporting, and the referral service for that CART was established. That's 2009. In 2010, CDHH established a statewide CART referral service. In 2013, the Emergency and Public Communication Access Program, EPCAP, was added. That's 2013. 2016, we added another full-time position, the 4th FTE for staff interpreter. The next slide, please. In 2017, CDHH changed that 4th FTE from staff interpreter to director of EPCAP. And then in 2019, I was hired. So I became the 3rd executive director and the first Black and Deaf executive director. That's the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing's timeline from its beginning until now. It's an interesting history. And, originally we set up a task force and brought that to the legislature to establish the commission. I'll explain more about, the fact that the General Assembly recognized that there was a need and that we would be permanent because deaf people in the state needed it. So that's the timeline. Let's move on to another slide. Thank you. Okay. So the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing it says to provide innovative leadership in public policy, advocacy, service delivery, and accessibility throughout the Ocean State. Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing ensures opportunities for every deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing person to become an empowered and contributing Rhode Island citizen. That's the mission. Next is the vision. And the mission statement and the vision statement have different purposes. They are, one of them is a commitment to work towards a certain goal, and the other is our vision of what we can do to make a difference. So it says Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing aspires to be recognized as the central resource and advocate for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing citizens in Rhode Island. So that's our role. Sorry. Yeah. We provide resources and advocacy throughout Rhode Island. So we have the guiding principles, and there are three. Communication access to ensure opportunity and equality. So for communication, it's to ensure that all Rhode Island deaf and hard of hearing citizens have full access to public audio and visual information and communication through sign language interpreter services, captioning, and technology. That includes CART, CDIs, DIs, as needed. That we don't want to exclude anyone. We want to include everyone. We want to make sure that everyone's needs are met. So we want to make sure that there's not one individual left behind. For opportunity to create new opportunities through advocacy, policy, education, employment, and legislation for all Rhode Island deaf and hard of hearing citizens. We set up the four committees, the four subcommittees: employment, education, tech access, and healthcare, to talk about opportunities to help the deaf and hard of hearing citizens to make sure that we have qualified services and that everyone has satisfactory services. That is one of the things that we make sure that we provide those kind of resources and access to resources to make sure that the situation, the lives of all the deaf and hard of hearing citizens are improved. Equality, it says to promote equality in the communities and society for all Rhode Island deaf and hard of hearing citizens. That's to ensure that their rights are protected, that they have communication access, that they are not less than or second-class citizens, that they have equal access as non-deaf people to everything. And obviously we have a long way to go, but compared to our history, we've done a lot, but we still have more to do. It has been a struggle and we're not giving up. We're keeping on going. Next slide, please. Thanks.
And now moving on to legislative mandates. You may wonder why this is an important part, but the legislative mandate means that there are several laws specifically that spell things out for us. So in view of the barriers and disadvantages with deafness and hearing impairments imposed on those individuals so affected, and in view of the testimony on deafness received by a legislative study commission, it is hereby proposed that a permanent Rhode Island Commission of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing be established. So they recognize that it's important that this is permanent. This is not something that was a temporary task force. So the task force that was set up had done the research, proved that this was a permanent need, and that there are specific laws that were established that need to be followed. So there are some legislative mandates and bills that are on in Rhode Island that have established this commission. Moving on to the next slide. Okay. So the reason that the commission was established is that it shall be primarily coordinating and advocating body acting on behalf of special concerns of deaf and hard of hearing persons in Rhode Island. Its activities shall be independent of any existing agency or department within the state. And the commissions shall be accountable directly to the executive office of the state. And if you see that one of the things that mentioned here is the independence of existing agencies, that means that no other commission can take over the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, that it must be an independent. So picking back up, it says that the commission shall be not be an existing agency or department within the state. But of course, we do directly report to the executive office of the state and shall submit the annual report to the governor. The commission will assume the following duties. But we are only giving a report to the governor's office. It does not go to other agencies. That annual report that is made simply goes directly to the governor's office. And also, the commission was established for specific duties as mentioned here, and there are 9 of them. So we'll go through them all. Next slide. The first one is to bring about greater cooperation and coordination among agencies and organizations now serving or having the potential to serve the deaf and hard of hearing. So advocating with different organizations, deaf and hard of hearing organizations, or an organization that is unsure how to serve the deaf and hard of hearing community. We want to see services improved. If people are unsure of how to do that, they can reach out to us. We will coordinate and advocate and support the improvement of those services. The second is the promotion of greater accessibility to services for the deaf and hard of hearing. So, you know, if a CDI is needed, we're not going to say no to that kind of thing. We want to make sure that's established. If someone needs CART, we want to make sure that that is also requested and established. We want to make sure that there is equal access for all of the deaf and hard of hearing, and also conducting ongoing needs and assessments. We want to make sure to see if something comes up that was unexpected. We want to do the research that we need to do to learn more about it and solve issues as they arise. We're always using different statistics and data. We want to identify any of the issues that come up so that we can readjust as we're continuing to improve. So those are the first 3. Moving on to the next slide. The next slide is to promote an increased awareness and provide information and referrals. We want to make sure that anyone who's needing speech or making sure we have coffee hours, we're having monthly meetings, weekly meetings. We want to continue that awareness in the community, within the deaf and hard of hearing community, about organizations, what's going on in Rhode Island, what's needed. We want to continue to increase awareness. Advocacy, advocate for the enactment of legislation that would assist the needs of individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. This is regarding people wanting to bring bills to the legislature that advocacy needs throughout the community, bills that would benefit the community, being a part of that advocacy bringing any bills that might need to be improved or changed or adjusted that would benefit the deaf and hard of hearing community. We want to be a part of that, make sure we are listening to the voices and needs that are there, and encourage the deaf and hard of hearing community to be able to advocate and pass any bills that they're wanting to see. And if there's a particular bill that does not support the deaf and hard of hearing community or would harm the community, we want to make sure that we are very loudly speaking against that, and making sure that the bill is removed or does not pass. So this is really talking about advocacy across the bill process and the legislature, anything that would impact the deaf and hard of hearing community. So it's a very important part of our mission. The sixth one here is the administration of sign language interpreter referral service. So we've been doing that for a number of years, taking on that responsibility of interpreter referral services and making sure that that process is smooth and ongoing. So that is the sixth one. There are three more. So taking the necessary action to improve the quality of life for deaf and hard of hearing individuals in Rhode Island. We want to make sure that the quality of life is great. We don't want to see that go downhill. We recognize, of course, with COVID for sure, we want to make sure that there's access to everything that's needed. There are interpreters, that the vaccine, all the information is clear. We want to see equal access. We want to see any place where there is frustration that people are not giving up because, for example, they can't access the vaccine information. We want to be there advocating and making sure the quality of life is on par with anyone else in the state. Moving on to the seventh. The eighth, we want to track clearly yearly services provided by exempted interpreters as defined in subsection Rhode Island General Law 5-71-15-4. So what that means is that any interpreters who are independent contractors, or we want to make sure that we're counting, we're making the statistics that need, creating the data, how many requests are been made, how many have been filled, all of those things. I'm sure Holly's going to explain more of that when she talks about her program, but that is one of the requirements that we need to do to review all of the statistics related to that. And the next slide, this one is a bit longer. So we talked about this a little bit before, but it's to develop a statewide coordinating council that will coordinate the implementation of the comprehensive statewide strategic plan for children in Rhode Island who are deaf or have hearing loss. The composition and functions and activities of the statewide coordinating council shall be consistent with the provisions of the strategic plan developed through the Rhode Island Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So you see here in red, it says, however, the Board of Trustees for the Rhode Island School for the Deaf was implemented at the same time as the 8th mandate. We do not need to do this as it would be duplication of services. So they're doing the same thing. So we decided that this one, Board of Trustees would pass along. So this 8th one really is not something, if for some reason there was no Rhode Island School for the Deaf, then we would begin servicing this. But at this point, this is something that has been transferred to the Rhode Island School for the Deaf as working with the Department of Education as elementary and secondary education as it relates to deaf and hard of hearing children. So of course we can check in on that, but this mandate has been transferred mostly to the Rhode Island School for the Deaf. Okay, so moving on from here, the Rhode Island Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing organizational chart. What does it look like? I'm going to, at this point, turn off my video so that you can look at it without me being inside of the screen. Okay. So if you could see that organizational chart, there's the committee of 13, and then under that is the executive director, myself, and anything that needs to be improved or any oversight from that would be there. Then there's 3 FTEs full-time. We have the program manager, interpreter referral service, and emergency access program. So there are 3 FTEs that I'm responsible to oversee. And also you might have recognized at the bottom that there's also a contract. So we also have 1 contract ongoing, and any others that come in are contracted, whether it's the HSTP or the COVID coordinator, any further contracts you might see, they're not permanent, they're all temporary. So they might be just for a few years, but at that point they're temporary. So we do have 1 that's more of a permanent contract, and that goes under interpreter referral. So there are essentially 4 full-time with the 3 FTEs. And then there's also on the committee, the 2 the commission and the legislature committee. So you can see how all of that looks here. Okay. So now that you've seen all of that, you have that information and what the chart looks like. So now I'm going to start turning this over to the 4 staff to present on their particular program. Maybe they'll go over the history, the project, just a summary of what's going on within that. So first we're going to go through the 4. The first one is the information and referral, and that is going to be with Pam Zellner. And then from there, we're going to go to interpreter referral, and that will be presented by Holly St. Pierre. And then emergency preparedness and communication access program will be Mike Bear. And healthcare system transformation program will be Christine West. So I'm going to turn off my video at this point and stop my screen share so that I can let each one of them present with their own PowerPoints regarding their programs. And then if you have any questions on that, we will go from there. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ernest. Thank you. So now we're going to talk some more and go a little bit more in depth about the information and referral, the history, the major responsibilities, and the program and other services. So next slide, please. Okay, as you can see here, this is a fairly old picture. It's back from 1999. Ernest already explained the entire timeline of the history from 99 up to this point, but I'm just going to take a little cross section of this part of the timeline. And in 99, when we had our first executive director, there were 3, but before 99, what we had is there were 2 staff, myself and another woman, the woman with the glasses in the picture. It was the 2 of us. And her job was the senior research assistant. She was the SRA. And over time, the staff has continued to change and expand. So for example, the executive director was added and hired in 99. And the SRA position was actually changed to interpreter referral specialist, and that was in 2003. And that was a contract referral specialist. And also we had a coordinator, and that was my old position. the coordinator, and that was eventually changed to program manager, and that was in 2006. So then it continued to expand with emergency preparedness, communication access, and in 2013, that was the FD was hired. So the goal of that was we really want to point out specifically the red information here, information and referral. You can see what's red, it's under the SRA's major responsibilities. So that was primarily the responsibility of the woman with the glasses in that picture. Those were the 4 responsibilities that she was working. So keep that in mind as I continue to explain the history here, and you'll kind of see, and things will make a little bit more sense for you, and how it ended up falling under my job description. Okay, next slide, please. So if you can see, as Ernest has already explained, that there are several different legislative mandates. And the 4th one that's highlighted in yellow, that one talks about really, well, in the 77, when the legislature established the agency about referral services, and it was really important that we shared information about the deaf and hard of hearing community. So the information and referral services was part of the agency, its original legislative mandate. And since then, over the years, the services have expanded. Also, there was a lending library, there was an equipment lending program, along with several other directories and local, regional, and national resources for the deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Next slide, please. So the major responsibilities you can see then started to split. There were 2. There was the coordinator and program manager. So under coordinator, those were my previous responsibilities. There were several different responsibilities like office coordination, just managing operations, finances, records, outreach training, also a supervisory responsibilities that was for any interns or volunteers. It was my responsibility to supervise them. There's also the support and the commission and any committees. So there was some other responsibilities that were given to me by the director. So that continued until 2006, and then my position changed because the SRA position was vacant. And so it changed to interpreter referral specialist. And so the information and referral services, we needed to figure out how that was going to be filled. And so it ended up being added to my job description. So ever since then, I was called the program manager, so 2006 to present. So all of the other responsibilities remained the same, as you can see, except for the addition of the information and referral management. Next slide. So just explaining a couple of the different programs and services that we offer. Information and referral service is really like a clearinghouse for information and different referrals and resources about hearing loss. Any research, articles, fact sheets, resource lists that could be available on request. Second one is the Lending Multimedia Resource Library. We have videos, DVDs, books, magazines, and a number of other media about hearing loss, and people can borrow them for up to 2 weeks without any cost. Assistive Technology and Equipment Loan Program. There are some devices that are available for borrow. There's audio loops, FM systems, TTYs, and whatnot that could be borrowed for a short time at no cost. The last one is the outreach, which is to provide training and workshops and presentations and exhibits. And we maintain information on a website. We publish newsletters. We will run forums and town hall meetings throughout the state of Rhode Island. those are some of the different programs and services that all of the statistics that happen within them. You know, how many people have borrowed certain equipment, how many people have requested information about this or that, how many different places have been visited, all of the statistics for each one of these things listed, both monthly and per fiscal year. We keep that, all of those statistics within a database so that we can pull up in a specific month statistics or also look at a full year's fiscal year's statistics. Next slide. Well, thank you so much for your time and all this information on referral. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'm not seeing, it looks like we're all good. Am I good? All right. Well, if you think of any question later that you wish you had asked, feel free to reach out to me for any questions.
Tim saying, that was an excellent presentation, Pam, very succinct, to the point, very good. So if people call you and they want information, is there some, do you feel like you can handle the load, or is it overwhelming, or what? I think if you had asked me 4 years ago, my answer would have been different for sure. At different times, different things are occurring because of the staff. For a while, I was actually executive director temporarily, and that was overwhelming. But right now, I don't feel overwhelmed because I do want to share that I've noticed there's a high percentage of statistics that either relates to people being deaf or hearing. And people will call me and ask for information. Sometimes there's more deaf people than hearing people, more hearing than deaf, but not as many hard of hearing people. That I have noticed over time. Thank you, Pam. I think we're all set. Thanks everyone for your attention. Should we move on to the next speaker, the next department? And
That would be
Ernest-
Holly, and Holly is co-host, so she can share her screen.
Yes, Holly St. Pierre.
This is my first time sharing a screen, so let me get this going. Okay. So are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I am the interpreter referral specialist. The interpreter referral service was established in 1993 and CART services were added in 2010. I actually started working as referral specialist in April of 2012 as a contractor, and then I interviewed in the end of May of that year and started on as full-time state employee in June of 2012. When I first started the referral service, we had just under 3,000 requests per year, sign language and CART requests altogether. I think it was about 2,700 requests. And now, pre-COVID, this year has been a little bit slower, but pre-COVID, we were up to 6,000 requests annually. 25% of that, or 20% of that being state requests, state-funded requests, and the other 80% was freelance work. So it has definitely increased over the years. So we currently provide interpreter services and CART services for healthcare providers, state and government agencies, nonprofits, schools, colleges, state universities. My process is obtaining requests from all of these locations to get sign language interpreters or CART services. I then take the requests that we get and we upload it into a new system that we use called USCED. We started using this in 2019. It's been a slow start. We've just basically had it accessible to sign language interpreters, but we are slowly rolling out new parts of USCED that we weren't fully utilizing before, because it's just a very in-depth service to use. So we've had to, as staff, get trained on it multiple times to make sure that we're using it correctly. I also provide advocacy and education about the ADA and the referral process to all of those facilities. And that's still on a weekly basis. I get several calls a week from medical facilities and other facilities to talk about how the referral service works, what their responsibilities are as a public entity, and the ins and outs of hiring an interpreter, about their fees, what the process is for invoicing, the turnaround time for getting an interpreter. I also field calls from consumers and requesters about these requests. It doesn't typically go from just submitting a request to filling it and then confirming it. There's a lot of back and forth with most requesters about details to the request, getting details that they've either left out or just getting extra details to be able to provide to the interpreters so that they have an accurate background of what job they're taking. Prior to COVID, I also went on site to provide trainings at these facilities to teach them about the ADA and our referral service and different technology that they could use. A lot of times employers of deaf consumers would want me to come on site and teach them about the different ways that they can provide communication access for their employees. I also attend public meetings that are related to the referral service, specifically RICDHH meetings. I've also attended the interpreter, what is the name of that? The interpreter conferences when I am able to attend those. I also provide statistical information about the amount of requests and what type of requests and report that back to the executive director. Statistics are changing with now using USCED. Is a different format to them that is changing, but we are adapting to that. We have to archive every single request that comes in. The state mandates that we hold on to this indefinitely for now. So we also, every request that we get in, we organize into a monthly system. So it's every month of every year in chronological order. That way, if we need to access those requests, if there's any requesters that are looking for answers about billing or who actually made the request, that we can go back to those requests to get that information. I also provide information to all of the interpreters that are on the master pricing agreement, which is the state payment system in Rhode Island. Any changes that happen with that, we have to inform all of those interpreters in a timely manner, as well as get all updated paperwork from those interpreters, including insurance requirements that they need to be able to be on the master pricing agreement. I collaborate that with Pam because she puts the packets together and sends that off to the purchasing department so that they have updated information. I collect paperwork from interpreters that want to get on the referral list to receive our daily jobs that are open. I also collect their information from if they want to be on the MPA, explain to interpreters new to the state how to become licensed. And also, I get requests often about how do they even become an interpreter. So I do relay the most up-to-date information regarding how to become an interpreter if they aren't already a certified interpreter. The request process, there's two different ways for the request process to happen. One is if a patient doesn't have insurance, they'll submit a request form directly to the commission by fax or email. And they'll soon be able to use our online web portal, USCED, to do that. And we'll announce that when that does become public. And if a patient does have insurance that covers it, we have specific forms for those insurance companies that they have to send to the insurance companies. All other requesting parties, state, public, freelance, they would just submit a commission request form to us by fax or email, and soon USCED once we get that up and going. As the referral specialist, I do provide advocacy for the deaf community. That's the majority of our advocacy. Is a lot of facilities either refuse to provide services for the deaf, providing interpreters, or just don't have the knowledge of how that works and how to provide that. So they might initially say to the deaf consumer, oh, we don't do that, or you have to provide that yourself. And I get a lot of calls from the deaf consumers asking me to call those locations and explain to them. That's pretty much weekly occurrence, if not every day, that I still get that even through COVID. It's just an ongoing education to the community of how to provide access. And then the other biggest form of advocacy that we provide is for service providers, interpreters that have not received payment for the jobs that they have been secured for. And although we don't get involved in billing itself, the process of billing and sending out an invoice, we do get billing information and provide that to the interpreters for them to do. And if they have tried multiple times to be paid for a job and have reached out multiple times and still are having difficulty, then I will set up a day within a month to contact all those places that have not paid the interpreters for their services yet. The needs for our department right now is it would be helpful for us to be able to attend trainings and professional development sessions that are related to our field so that we can continue to grow and learn more about what other referral agencies are doing, and to make it a smoother process here, because things are always changing, especially with the amount of requests multiplying so often. And then staff support, just from what I said in the beginning, starting at less than 3,000 requests annually and now being at 6,000 or more, it's a lot for one full-time specialist to do, especially when there's so much more than just the request form, request process of it. We're providing the advocacy multiple times a day, multiple times a week, which consumes a lot of time out of the schedule. to be able to contact everybody, get back in touch with all of our callers on a daily and weekly basis. So having a full-time, an additional full-time referral specialist would be extremely beneficial, especially, I mean, just to bring down the element of human error that can occur, and that does occur. I do believe Bethany did the math on it though, and we're still at 1% of human error or less, which is really good. But we always want to improve that. Challenges are, we've had the interpreter shortage for a long time, and it's only gotten worse with COVID. It's starting to get better. We're starting to have more, a lot of things are going to online. So that's been helping, but eventually that will transition back to being on site. Cart shortages, cart is pretty much non-existent. Most of the cart providers are going to court. We want to build a better relationship with the interpreter community and be more involved in the interpreter community. It's just trying to find the time to be able to be so physically involved with the interpreter community without having enough staff support for our position here. And then we'll go down to progress. USCED's been a great system. We're going to keep opening up more and more doors through USCED for the public to utilize that service. We do have Bethany as a part-time support, so that has been helpful in the last couple of years that she has been there. Hope to have her more hours soon. And then we have the IRS ad hoc committee that's been set up. So that should be able to pull from the community and deaf consumers and other agencies so that we can make it a better referral service and more up to date. So if anybody has any questions, just let me know. It's a lot of information to try to fit into a few minutes. Let me stop sharing. Hi, Boomy. Your mic is off.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, my question to you is the increase from like 2,000 something to 6,000. Would you say it's from more deaf people in Rhode Island or more awareness of as to where and how many people need sign language interpretation?
I think it's more education to the requesters of what their responsibilities are. And a lot of the interpreting community and other agencies are helping empower the deaf community to make these requests and to fight to get that communication access for themselves. So we are seeing a lot more requests and a lot more deaf and hard of hearing consumers standing up for themselves to get their needs met.
Awesome. That's what I like to hear. Thank you.
Let's see in the chat. Okay. Is anybody else popping on or good? Great, thank you.
And it says, thank you, Holly. The next one will be Mike Bear, and he's going to present now.
Just 1 second, let me get this set up. Okay, hello everyone, good evening. So I'm here talking about the EPCAP program, the EPCAP program. Next slide, Bethany. There we go. So as Ernest explained when he showed the timeline, the EPCAP program began in 2013. And really, there's a list of things that it does do, but it was established to provide emergency communication program for the deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing Rhode Islanders. So I'll go a little more into depth under that, but under Rhode Island general law, the statute, I didn't put down the number because I wasn't in the office the last 2 days, but I do have it here. It's section 31.8.4. So it's right here. 23.1 point. Yeah. And the second part of this law says it is funded by the Rhode Island Service Fund, and that fund services this program. The annual budget is $80,000 annually, and then it's transferred here to this agency, to my department. So I've learned over the last few years that the position really looks at ADA Title 2.3. So if you look at the law, there are 4 statutes. There are 4. The first one's on employment. The second one is regarding to state and public funding, and the next one is private, and then the last is services. So I'm looking at the last 2 of the 4, which is communication access. So really a key challenge, if you're in court and they were to look at the communication access between a deaf person and a hard of hearing person or a hearing person, and looking at whether it's effective. And this, after effectiveness, if it's not effective, then they need to provide a reasonable accommodation. So those are the 2 things that come up: effective and reasonable accommodation. So those are the 2 things that are repeated over and over. So as I'm talking with various agencies and departments, if a deaf person needs access, I help them to understand that the communication needs to be effective. And if it's not, then they need to provide a reasonable accommodation. And if it's continuing to not be, then we need to take further steps. Next slide. So really, this is a pop quiz for all of you. I know in the interest of time, it won't be, but when I arrived, the previous executive director had emphasized that throughout Rhode Island, there was some transition of text services to visual services, text communication to visual communication. So on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a lot of text communication, and that ended up transferring to more of a VRI system. And then of course you had TTY, but that has transitioned into CapTel. And then you have a regular phone that hard of hearing people could use and would struggle with. And now those have come to amplified phones. And then looking at the right-hand side, the TTY has also been changed into the video phones. Also, you see movie theaters not having captioning, and now they have open caption at movie theaters. So we're making progress there. The last one here is hearing loops for people who are hard of hearing. Previously, there was only 1 or 2 places that had that, and we've been able to expand that and really have more and encourage more places to have hearing loops. So establishing those hearing loops, it was only a few years ago, and several in the legislature were very said that they could hear so much better in the legislation. Some of them were struggling with their own hearing aids, and that loop service was a strong group here in Rhode Island that did a lot of advocacy regarding hearing loops. And throughout, you might see signs throughout Rhode Island, you might see signs for TTYs, and a lot of them are trying to change them over to video phones, and also providing some CapTel phones as well. So that's more for public accommodations throughout Rhode Island. Next slide. Bethany, next slide. Previous slide. Back up. There you go. So in my program, there are two things. There's the emergency communications, and that would be any emergency alerts, broadcasts. You might see them on TV, maybe on radio, TV, and also now it adds to so many more things, pagers, ways that people will get information, whether it's a national crisis or of course now COVID, and 911 services as well, making sure that 911 service provides accessible services, and that technology, as that increase, the text communication, we have to make sure as soon as we have the available technology that impacts 911 services. And also public safety entities is a lot more government and local towns. So looking at police, fire, emergency medical, EMS services, and many others. So I've been working with a number of those agencies throughout the state, and there's been some really great people that I've met. So many of them are thrilled when they interact with deaf people, and they tell me that, I know there are deaf and hard of hearing people, but I don't see them. I don't interact with them. And I say often we're invisible in the community. You might be walking past one. We're walking right by you. You don't know that until you try to communicate. And then there's a challenge. So the second part of that was the public communications. And regarding public communications, we're talking about accommodations for state and local government, public transportation as well. That would include airports, trains, buses, and there's so many different ways of communicating information, and often it's only audio. So making sure that there are the appropriate icons, that there's visual ways to send that information, and also public venues. There's the convention center, historic and cultural sites, museums, a number of different things, also sports, like the Dunkin' Donuts Center, for example, also arenas, tourism. There's so much tourism, and really to make sure that all travelers can be able to use VRS or Captel services to be able to make the connections they need, and that they would be readily available. So those are the things that are on the list of my responsibilities. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so the next two slides, I want to show you a few things that in the last few years have been really successful. And starting in 2017 is when I arrived, and that's when I started. And I was a contractor at that time, part-time. So the first assignment that I had was to change the website. I said, all right, so I got to work on updating the website and making the changes. You may remember, many of you probably were around to remember, I gave a presentation to the board, I think it was in the spring of 2018, about that updated website, and really learning about emergency preparedness as well. So we're talking with RIMA, building a relationship with them, and making sure that we had that understanding. And also with RIMA, how that would connect with federal FEMA, and learning all of that information as well. So I got the information, I had all that kit, and the training, we provided trainings. Actually, we provided 2 community trainings. One of them was last year. The community came out and we talked about community preparedness and emergency if something were to come up. And I also worked really closely with Rhode Island Special Needs Emergency Registry, RIDO. And they have been established 20 years at the Department of Health, and they have a database system where they keep people with disabilities all throughout Rhode Island, including deaf and hard of hearing. I don't know if you're aware of this or if you've registered yourself or not, but I learned about it and I immediately registered and said, I'm here, I'm deaf and hard of hearing. And the database goes into a 911 system, so that if you or myself or anyone were to call 911, it pops up on their screen that someone in the house is deaf and hard of hearing. And so 911 calls the local police or the local fire and lets them know there's a deaf and hard of hearing person that knows they're on their way. They're going to need an interpreter or any of the things that are needed. So it's really important to know that RIDO has that. And I admit that a lot of us are still unaware of this service. And there are several issues, with that, but that's something that RIDO is doing. So moving on from there, text to 911, I've really been pushing that. And in February of 2018, excuse me, somebody's just calling me right now. Let me just adjust that. All right. I was really pushing in February of 2018 to have text to 911 so that people will be able to text 911 in case of an emergency. And moving on from there, the video remote interpreting walk-in services. So we wanted to have some funding for that to support state agencies like the DMV, like the tax department, also some other departments, any health department, DCYF, a number of public departments that if a deaf or hard of hearing person were to go, there's immediate communication, frustration, but they would have walk-in service for VRI. So this right here is like my baby. I bring it on around with me everywhere I go. And right here, you just click the button and there's VRI services available. So we established this in 5 different locations, and there are 20 more, but of course, because of COVID, this was halted. Other things have come up, so finishing this project was put on hold. So there's 2 other areas that we're continuing. They're in the parking lot due to COVID. We want to establish an ASL community emergency response team. So if you know that all across Rhode Island, the cities and towns, they all have an emergency management office, and they rely on local people to volunteer to assist in case of some drastic emergency, whether it be a flood or a tornado or some blizzard or winter storm. Police, fire, EMTs, they're such a small group of people that they rely on more volunteers in case of an emergency evacuation, something like that. And how that impacts the deaf and hard of hearing is pretty immense. Just because we've been forgotten for so long, I had made the suggestion to REMA that there would be an ASL team, and they said, to do something statewide, not local, who would be responsible for the deaf and hard of hearing community throughout Rhode Island, and looking at that team, making sure that they were trained. There are 39 towns, and then make sure that there was communication access throughout the state, but that was put on hold. Also regarding the movie theaters, as you know, with the open captioning, Tim and I did a lot of work with Tone, the theater owners of New England, Tone, and we made slow but steady progress, but we want to do more. And I admit, looking at that, really hoping, and I noticed they still offer open caption, but I know theaters have been closed for a long time, but I think they opened up recently. So if you're aware of any that are offering open captioning, just let me know. The agreement that we have, the original agreement, was that there'd be 7 a week. So I want to make sure that there are still 7, but because they recently opened, we're still looking at how that progresses. So those are the 2. And then of course, everything COVID related, when that came up last year, February of 20, there was the office called Holly and said, well, we're going to need interpreters. And Holly was saying, well, this is a serious press conference related to COVID. And we started at that point until then to really focus on COVID issues. So a number of these were placed on hold or put in a parking lot because of that. So I'm going to do the next couple slides. I'm going to let you read. I'm not going to sign everything's on them, but I'll let you read them, and then I will explain a few. Bethany, next slide. Okay, next slide, Bethany. Okay, so I know it's a little wordy, but I hope Ernest will be able to give everyone here a copy of the PowerPoints later so that they can peruse them. But going from this list, I think pretty much most of these things have already occurred. Like there's the testing that we've already done, also using LinguaBee, one of the nationwide interpreter services. They have a great VRI service. We have an agreement with them to provide VRI. When a deaf and hard of hearing person needed a test, they would be able to establish VRI for communication for a COVID test. We couldn't send live interpreters because of COVID. There was no vaccine at that point. So we had to do as much as we could through VRI. Some people in the community were disappointed, but we said, just because of this medical issue, we can't force interpreters to go on site. And so we did move ahead with VRI. It seemed that it was a pretty smooth process and it did go well. At this point, with the vaccine, as Ernest has explained, I think there's some new or old business that we will talk about. And I think some example, we'll discuss that a little further. But first, I want the Rhode Island, the commission, to provide live interpreters for the vaccination process. So specifically senior citizens and interpreters, letting us know their experience, because some of them have already gone in phase 1. I think it started about six weeks ago. So and a lot of that was very positive experience. The National Guard being there, people were very friendly. And, once they were aware someone was deaf, going through that process, but often they were letting me know we really should have interpreters there, just because our deaf community and trilingual community, there's a lot of people who are very nervous about the vaccination process and would have a lot of questions. And so we agreed with that, and we made a suggestion of that with the Department of Health. We went back and forth, and last week on Thursday, they finally said they did agree with this and they would provide live interpreters. So that being said, one site in Cranston, and they called it a pilot service, meaning they want to test out and see how it goes, looking at the numbers. But Ernest and I were saying, well, they were asking us for specific numbers, and we said it's really hard to provide numbers. A lot of it would be estimates, but we're moving forward with it and looking at our schedule. We're saying, well, potentially 2 times a week. And there would be a private link that would be set up for people to register for a vaccine. And it is not following the phase-by-phase process. And I'm really glad that they're being flexible on that point for this community. And specifically to make sure that, this is life or death, it could be a risk. We don't want something to happen that, we don't want anything negative to happen here. So with that on the line, I think there's a lot regarding money. Of course, it always comes down to the cost and, what is it going to cost interpreters? And, it's not in my budget. Looking at the budget line, it's often what it comes down to. And often we can assist, we can each pay half, or we can start paying the first few and then they'll pay some few in the future. So we're still looking into some more solutions for that. But another example of this would be, I'm not sure if you have already seen the portal.rhodi.gov or the count. If not, I'd encourage you to look at it. But let me just show you what it looks like. This is what the website would look like. Here's how you fill out the information. So it was set up specifically for testing, and the purpose was to schedule a test. You would go in, reserve a time, then go take a COVID test, and they all required appointments. Now testing services walk in at several places. Some of them still do require an appointment. So there are 4 different purposes. One of them is to schedule a test. One of them is to see your testing results and to look at that. Once you've had a vaccine, they give you a status card. It's a card for your vaccination. If you lost it, or, you know, if you're going back to work and maybe your employer is requiring to see a vaccination card, you can actually print one from that site. Another, oh, I skipped this one. This one's a pretty small one, but it's not very friendly process for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. Myself, I went in, and to me, it took me a little bit of time to navigate the system. So I decided to reach out to the Department of Health, and talking to the equity and diversity and inclusion team and reaching out with them and saying, this is really not accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing community. And they suggest, you know, some other communities as well, maybe if they're from foreign, if they're from various ethnic groups where English is not their first language, they're all actually in the same boat. So we had a meeting, and just a general meeting for ideas. And then they decided, myself and Ernest specifically, to talk about the deaf and hard of hearing. And also there's some others, clients that have been, so there are 3 more people brought on as well. So we really want to create something that is less text-based and more visual-based. So trying to come up with the correct icons and visual cues to help people through this process. We've sent along some suggestions and are waiting for it to see its improvement. So now specifically when it about reserving an appointment for a vaccine, it's a different website. It's not this same website. So there's vaccinaterhode-island.org, and I'm not sure why they didn't use the same system, but they didn't, but it's a similar issue. It's a very, there's the pre-vaccination questions, and there's a list of questions. It's not very friendly to the deaf and hard of hearing community. And we brought the same issue to them. And then also the phone service. You'll see that there's 1-84301-789, and there's the phone service here. And it says that it's an automated phone system, which means it's press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for this. And really it's not effective. There's 6 different steps. And then once you get to the end, you know, there's no place to leave a message. So I was lost. So I ended up writing out a report about the accessibility of that. And the COVID vaccine sign-up line, that's the phone number I'm talking about. So I just talked about my experience, and I explained that to people, and they said, you can't just do it in a conversation. It needed to be documented on paper. So I ended up creating this report. So if you remember, I explained it when I got to the end. I couldn't find a way to get to voicemail. And then it actually ended up being sent to my email and through text. So I had the interpreter on the screen who said, you need to press this, you need to press this, and then we got disconnected. So I ended up showing that to them, and they said, okay, I see that. I made some suggestions. And I said, press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish. And I suggest maybe 1 English, 2 Spanish, and then 3, if you are deaf or hard of hearing, press 3. And then that would be a direct to a live person. Maybe it'd be at the Department of Health, some of the health line, or maybe some place in the vaccination system, instead of trying to navigate through an automated system. So that sometimes deaf and hard of hearing people have 2 phone numbers. They have a text number and a VP number, and they never thought of that. They thought all were voice to text. And I said, no. So I explained, I gave them a lot more information, and they said, okay, we've realized that, and we can support that with IBM. So IBM had said, that's really great. We've never seen that before. You've never even heard of this issue as an issue out there. And so we made that suggestion. I'm really excited to see how that progresses. One more example. The Department of Health, there was a number of questions that have some significant words, and talking to some some significant vocabulary, talking with some DIs and CDIs. We looked at the form for that people need to fill out when they're going to get a vaccine. And then they have to sign the consent. So this is what the form looks like that they need to fill out in order for a consent. So I think, there's some people would be able to figure it out, but generally I would say 70% of our community, I'm not looking at the smaller percent that would access this pretty well, but asking them to look at it, ask them, this isn't the final, but I suggested this and it seemed more accessible. So if you see, there's not that much a difference, but I mean, you can see the difference. And I feel that, we're really doing a lot of education here, that this is not just going to be beneficial for the deaf and hard of hearing community, but it's a universal design for those who English is their second language. So, I also talked about adding ASL to their website, maybe making their website less text-based, and talked about a number of things. So it was a really good conversation. I think, there are things to be thankful for, that COVID brought some really great public awareness to the deaf and hard of hearing community. You see, every time the governor has a press conference, there's sign almost across every state. And so I think there's more general awareness of to the public for the deaf and hard of hearing community, which has been a great benefit. So I think there's a couple other things that we could talk about as well. But in closing, I have a wish list, and I just want to present that. Bethany, next slide. So I'll just let you read this. So this is my wish list, and I'm challenging you to make this happen in the next few years, and we'll see how it goes. I say that a little ironically, but also seriously. Just being one person, it's impossible to do all of these things. But I feel that I've been a little bit. People have been saying you're behind on doing this or that, but I mean, really, I don't want to do things and make it good enough and pass it along. I want to do things with excellence. And so I was really, waiting to see how we could do things in the spring. You remember I gave a presentation, but then, for 2 weeks, then there wasn't anything. So I really wish I had a team, someone who was doing more vlogs, someone looking at social media, and not only, more in a general way, like I really want to see more ASL on our website. I want to see all public policies, interpreter services, referral. I'd like to see all of it accessible. So I think, I'm just one person, and, we need some more manpower with this, but looking at this list specifically at the end, the SSP, for deafblind, I know we really need it. They've been waiting and waiting, I believe 7 or 8 years, and they keep coming and saying, what are you waiting for? And I have to respond, I'm involved in negotiating of this, that, and the other thing. And then Ernest just arrived, and, he also recognizes this importance, but mentioning it to you and commissioners as well, maybe it might require some legal, but we need to find the funding to support the SSP process. So looking at our list of things, I would say there's about 25 deafblind across Rhode Island. And I've spoken with a few of the leaders, and I said, there's about 25. And they said, no, there's over 100, because there's many who live in denial, who don't accept that deafblind status. So there's probably over 100. So wanting to add SSP also to this list. But thank you so much. I'm open for any questions. I know I've gone over time, but I think it's really important to be able to look at all of these things. And interpreter caught up, good?
This is, any dumb question is fine too. Don't be ashamed. No question is a stupid question. All right, going once, going twice. Oh, that's it. Time out. Thank you, Mike Bear, for your presentation about your program. And I don't know if we need to do a break at this point. I know people have been sitting. So I don't know if we should take a quick break or if we can continue. Yes, maybe what, 5 minutes? Is that 5 minutes that we could take? And then the next person speaking is going to be Christine West to talk about HSTP. So let's take a break and come back at 8:15, if that's all right. We'll see you soon. Hopefully you've had a chance to grab some coffee or something. You've had a little break. So the 5 minutes, I know that people are asking, what time is the presentation going to go? We were originally scheduled for 8. But now I'm thinking maybe we'll be finished at 8:30 or 8:45. The interpreters have been booked until 9. So we'll definitely wrap up by 9 and probably before 9. We have Christine West next, and then I will move forward with, I'll kind of continue at a pretty fast pace, and I'll take a Q&A and then wrap up. I'm sorry that we're over a little bit of our scheduled time at 8, but there's so much essential information. We'll try to finish as soon as possible. So I'm going to hand over the floor to Christine West, who's going to talk about the healthcare system transformation project.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll be talking about HSTP, the Healthcare System Transformation Project. Before I begin, I just want to take a brief moment. I know we're busy moving forward with all of our presentations and the board orientation. I just want to take a brief moment.
One moment, the host closed my video. Coming back on. Thank you, Christine.
Sure. I just wanted to take a brief moment to recognize those folks who were impacted by the shooting yesterday in Atlanta, Georgia. 8 people killed, 6 Asian American women. So I just want to take a moment to stand in solidarity with those folks before I continue with my presentation. So moving on to HSTP. Unlike the 3 programs that were just shared, which are all legislatively mandated and staffed by FTEs, the Healthcare System Transformation Project is a time-limited grant-funded program, and all HSTP staff are temporary contractors. The actual grant proposal was finalized in January of 2020, just last year. However, the work involved in capturing this funding actually started about 6 years ago, and I'd like to walk you through that history. Bethany, next slide. So back in 2015, Governor Gina Raimondo had issued an executive order 15-08, and she established the working group to reinvent Medicaid. This working group was charged with trying to identify sustainable savings initiatives in order to transform the Rhode Island Medicaid system. And this was to pay for better outcomes, better coordination, and higher quality care. With a strong partnership with the legislature and community leaders, the Reinventing Medicaid Act of 2015 was passed, and that allowed Rhode Island to be able to expand and improve access to quality care and reduce costs. And the goal of this was to achieve over $100 million of annual Medicaid savings. So as a result, the working group delivered a multi-year plan for the transformation of the Rhode Island Medicaid program. Rhode Island did receive approval from Medicaid through a 1115A special terms and conditions for the Healthcare System Transformation Project. And this allows the state to claim federal matching funds for a total of $129 million over a 5-year period. So in 2016 to 2018, meetings took place between the executive director of RICDHH and EOHHS to secure funding for a healthcare system transformation project under RICDHH. From 2019 to 2020, the proposal and funding was finalized, and RICDHH was awarded a grant in the amount of $646,000. The grant was actually called Improving Healthcare Access for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Individuals. Recently, in January of this year, EOHHS approved a no-cost extension for RICDHH and this grant to continue until December 31st of 2023. Next slide, thank you. So the main project goals for HSTP are data collection, workforce training, and workforce development. So data collection includes these establishing baseline and current findings of any data or any health surveillance that has been conducted within the deaf and hard of hearing community. In addition to that, we are required to develop and disseminate a survey to the deaf and hard of hearing community to identify health outcomes, barriers to care, quality of patient-provider relationships, and also to develop and implement a survey for the medical community to identify their deaf cultural competence, how much they know about working with deaf and hard of hearing individuals, what perceptions they may have, and what are some barriers to care from their perspective. The final project deliverable for that goal will be a consolidated report that includes the results of those surveys, as well as recommendations for future health policy programs and services. The second goal is workforce training, and that includes a series of trainings for the healthcare workforce. So that means the medical community. That also includes students who are studying healthcare professions, as well as other stakeholders. And then the third and final project goal is workforce development. And that involves the development and implementation of the state's first interpreting program, sign language interpreter program, with a focus on medical interpreting. So RICDHH is the prime recipient of this grant. However, a subaward has been given to Rhode Island College as they are our primary collaborator in establishing the interpreter program. Next slide. In terms of staff for RICDHH, as you can see, it's myself, Alex LaFerriere, Thomas Darden, and Lindsay Conway. And that was personnel under RICDHH. And you can also see Dr. Marie Lynch, who's our primary collaborator at Rhode Island College and who was granted the subaward under this grant. As of December 2020, the grant did decide to reduce staff by half. And this was to allow for the continuation of the grant work and to be able to finish up our remaining project deliverables. So currently it's just myself and Alex LaFerriere, and we're still working with Marie Lynch over at Rhode Island College. Next slide, please. This is the original project budget as of January 2020. It has changed since a bit, since our no cost extension. But the original budget, again, $646,192. As prime recipients, the RICDHH project budget was $344,139. The subaward given to RIC was in the amount of $302,053. And you can see the breakdown of both the personnel costs and non-personnel costs for both RICDHH and Rhode Island College. Next slide, please. Some of our successes to date, we had a successful launch video that Alex LaFerriere was able to produce, and we're so lucky to have his media skills as a member of the team. Next, we created a spotlight series for deaf and hard of hearing healthcare professionals last summer, which we felt was very successful. Third, we engaged in a video testimonial campaign with the deaf and hard of hearing community. We were able to capture their thoughts on what they would like to see changed and improved within the healthcare system in Rhode Island. Next, we've partnered with Gallaudet University for our survey for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. They were able to provide us with their expertise in carrying out that endeavor. We also were able to collaborate with the University of California, San Diego, and that was for our healthcare professional survey. Just last week, we announced our new website, and I hope folks have had the opportunity to see that, and you can learn more about the project at that website. We have a series of virtual trainings for healthcare providers that we are currently working on. Those are also available on our website. Once those videos are edited and captioned and interpreted, those will be available to the healthcare workforce and will be provided with opportunities to earn continuing education units. And finally, we're looking forward to launching the interpreter program in August at Rhode Island College. So we've been working very hard on that. There's a lot that's going into that, and really want to thank Dr. Marie Lynch over at RIC, who's been working very hard on this. Another success that's not listed on this page is really the healthcare committee. It's been revived after about 1.5 years of being dormant. And I just want to recognize both Brett Hayes and Caroline Obrecht for being committed to that committee, because they've served as our advisory board, and they've both done a fantastic job of supporting us. So thank you to them. Next slide. Finally, if you'd like to follow us or connect with us, you can do so via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or feel free to reach out at any time. And again, there's all of our information is included on our website, so please feel free to reach out and take a look. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Christine. How did you figure out to connect with the University of San Diego? Short response.
Sure. Well, we were looking to develop a survey to assess deaf cultural competence. And so we did a lit review. Basically, we looked for research to determine if a survey had already been done and if we could adopt one. That would certainly make our work a lot easier. And so when we did that, we identified one at UCSD. There was one developed there through the Moores Cancer Center. And so we actually reached out to the authors to gain permission in order to borrow that survey. And they granted that to us. And then we were able to add some Rhode Island specific questions. And then we were able to transfer that to an online platform so that we could send it out in mass to all stakeholders throughout the state. And we were able to send it to about 19,906 healthcare professionals and healthcare students across the state. So that certainly saved us a lot of work in being able to use an existing survey that had already proved effective. So that was how we arrived at that decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Christine? Okay, hearing none. Thank you for your presentation about HSTP. Thank you so much. So if we could go back to my PowerPoint and we'll move forward through that in the time we have left. Okay, I'll get to where I left off. Okay. So we're focusing on the budget. The programs have talked about their various budgets for the 4 presenters we've had. And first, for the FY 2019, we had 603,000 with 4 FTE positions. In 2020, 673,977, again with FTEs 4.0. In this fiscal year, currently 2021, we have 650,270. And you can see that it's gone down from 673. And it, we don't have enough money to do what we need to. So for FY 22, we're proposing 837,586, and we're asking for an additional FTE, a 5th full-time position to be added, specifically to work with interpreter referral. That's already been identified, and we hope that it'll be improved. And if it is not, I don't know what'll happen, but I mean, it's going to be it's getting close to $1 million, but at the same time, we have these needs and we need to be awarded a 5th FTE to be able to do the work we're trying to do. There's a link below that's a hot link that you can click on if you want to find out. I mean, years ago, we had a very small budget, and of course, it's increased every year. And this is our request for the coming up fiscal year. Next slide, thank you. So funding sources. Mike had spoken about some of the budget for EPCAP. We have received two separate funding sources. One is general revenue, which comes from the legislature. They collect millions of dollars from taxes and distribute it to different state agencies. And they give us about $500,000 a year. That's our annual budget from the legislature. And then the restricted receipts, that's 80,000. And that's from the PUC, the public utilities. And it's under the TRS. So that's 80,000 every fiscal year that we also get. We also are able to get a budget from the HSTP, as Christine mentioned. We have a grant from EOHHS and also from the CRF, the COVID Relief Fund, and FEMA. So some of our money goes for interpreting and for making blogs, anything related to COVID, letter writing and outreach to people, giving out free masks, that kind of thing. That is part of our budget every year. And this year with COVID. So I want to talk now about the Open Meeting Act, OMA, and the Access to Public Records, APRA. For the OMA, open meetings, I know there's always some confusion about what open meetings requires, and I want to explain and differentiate the OMA versus the APRA. Basically, it establishes important requirements for ensuring that government in Rhode Island is carried out in an open and transparent manner. So the information is able to flow both, from the consumers and the citizens to the different state agencies and the other direction as well. So if we violate the Open Meetings Act, what happens is there'll be an investigation. If there's any complaints, there's a group that will investigate that. State agencies for any alleged violations of the statutes. If there's any issues, findings, they would file lawsuits to enforce the statutes where appropriate. Which means we could get sued if we violated the Open Meetings Law or the Access to Public Records Act. And also they process the APRA requests for public documents. That means like if there's some information that we are given, we have to be able to process that and send that back about, who requested that information, and who it was distributed to. We have to provide trainings and resources on the requirements of the OMA and the APRA, including at our event, the annual Open Government Summit. So ignorance of the law is no excuse. Basically, we the different committees, the different staff, the commissioners can learn more about the OMA, what we can and cannot do. And there's more information available, and it spells out all the different details. So people can take trainings, and we'll be discussing that more soon as well.
So now specifically on the Open Meeting Act, the reasons that people want it to be open and accessible is that anytime there is a meeting date, it needs to be publicized according to OMA, the specific date of the meeting, and also 48 hours notice before the meeting. So if the meeting was today, it has to be publicized by Monday or Friday, 48 hours. So if it is not publicized in 48 hours, then you can't have your meeting. It has to have the 48 hours publicizing the meeting. And regarding OMA, it has to include the date, the location of the meeting, the specific business that will be discussed at the meeting, all have to be posted. What's going to happen, what's going to be discussed. And so it requests an agenda. So all of that information has to be laid out clearly in an agenda so that it can be accessed according to OMA. If you have all of that set, then you're free to go ahead with your meeting. Right. And also, OMA also requires that the meeting minutes must include the date, the time and the place of the meeting, the members of the organization, who was there, who was absent, all has to be recorded publicly. And any record of votes, how many votes, who voted, all of those things have to be there, who voted for or against. And also there's information that needs to be in it as well. Any relevant information has to be noted within the minutes. And a quorum is required. There's 5 for VHH. So if some people aren't available, 5, we could go ahead with a meeting. But if there are 4 or 3, the meeting would have to be canceled. So also for a majority, there has to be a majority for the committees. So this is just more of a true or false questions here, but anything that is not posted on the agenda, it can't be discussed. So that's false. It could be something that's not posted. That's false. So the minutes must include the details of the discussions is also false. So any really relevant information has to be detailed. Also, a person can be removed from a meeting if disruptive. That is actually true. People can be removed from a meeting. Continue. Electronic meetings are only allowed for scheduling. And that is true. A member can give their vote over the phone is false. Except right now, this is actually waived. But historically, this is not allowed. You cannot vote over the phone. Moving on here, you can discuss things by email to save time. That's actually false. You have to discuss things within an email. It doesn't matter how long that, within the meeting, it has to be discussed, not within an email. So that would be false. Next slide. These paragraphs here further detail, you'll see where the asterisks are, that nothing contained herein shall prevent a public body other than a school committee from adding additional items of the agenda by a majority vote of the members. And then the next one says, no meeting of members of a public body or use of electronic communication, including telephonic communication and telephone conferencing, shall be used to circumvent the spirit of requirements of this chapter. Discussions of a public body via electronic communication, including telephonic communications and telephone conferencing, shall be permitted only to schedule a meeting. So it's not allowed, but there is an exception right now under COVID, under the governor's executive order. So as soon as the governor's executive order ends, we'd have to go back to a live meeting, no longer on Zoom. So that is the policy as it stands. So going back to OMA, the minutes must reflect how members vote, which is true. The meetings must be canceled if there's no interpreter. That's actually false. You could go ahead without an interpreter. I know that that's not really equitable, but according to the law and policy, that is true. Minutes must be generated for workshops, and that is true. So example, today, the orientation, that's why we still have minutes, and we go through all of those, the same process. So our board retreat, we also have to have minutes taken as well. So is it possible to have an emergency meeting? And yes, it is possible. So audience members must be allowed to speak is actually false. So the reason for that, there is a section of public comment at the beginning of the meeting. And after that part of public comment, the audience is not required to speak. They can hold their comment until later, until the committee's proceedings have finished. And then the reason for that is that if discussions are off point, or things like that, we can continue back into the agenda. So that's actually false, that we could refuse audience members to speak after that public comment. So the APRA also has requirements. We'll just run through those. There has to be 10 working days to respond to requests for records. So there's a requirement to ask for records that are not public. There needs to be a written explanation as to why they're being requested. There can also be a charge for the copying, and then the records must include the minutes, the amount of time that it takes to make the copies. Also, the public records need to include the minutes, papers, letters, reports, financial records, or any other formats, whether it's printed, books, tapes, electronic information. So all of this would be within the request for public records. So, and it would take 10 days to go through this process, and you're allowed that. So going through the APRA about meeting minutes, they are allowed to be requested and sent for the public to read. Closed meeting minutes, the public cannot request. So that's false. They're considered closed and confidential. So that information cannot be requested. Documents that are only stored electronically, if someone is wanting that information in public records, they can be email, and they can request that information, and according to the APRA, that information would be sent. TTY tapes, that's pretty old-fashioned, but if there was a communication over TTY and people want to see what that communication is, that's not something that can be requested according to public record. Any cart output information, if the public wants to see that, that's not something that needs to be shared. That is internal use only. Any preliminary drafts or working papers that are used at that level, if the public wants to see a draft of something, that's not something that would be made public. those are confidential in-house information, so it is not required to be given according to the APRA. Correspondence, emails, letters, fax. If the public does request to see any of those, any emails or faxes, then yes, they would have to be shown publicly, and a specific date or time of an email, and that would have to be provided. Interpreter qualifications detailed. If an interpreter is good or not good, if there's a request for that, that is not something that is required to be shared. That can be kept internally. Also, the CDHH interpreter list, if people are asking to see that, that is something that people could be given so that they could read through the list. That is allowed. Next slide. So the interpreter requests and CART requests, if people want to see those requests and who requested interpreters, etc., that is information is not, it's all sensitive information, confidential. It's not something that would ever be shared publicly. So that information would be withheld. Committee minutes and reports, if people want to see that information, then that would be provided for the public to be able to access. So it's very important for the commission to know which information is public and which is not. So if people request information from specific meetings, it's important for commissioners to know which information, which recordings. I could definitely send this to you so that you can review it and know which is public and which is not. Also, there'll be some trainings for the commission to review, OMA and the APRA. So the first link is the Open Government Summit Access to Public Records Act and Open Meeting Act. And that is a link here for you to look at. It's really important that you know both OMA and APRA. Just to let you know, they are long. They're several hours. The videos are several hours long. So it's going to take a little bit of time for you to review it. There are also some PowerPoints. I think the PowerPoints are over 150 slides. So to look at all of that, it's a lot of information. And also, if you want more information on the link in the training, you can go in and look at all that information and then look at the PowerPoint as well. And then you'll be done. So you can feel free to contact me, and then I would be able to give you a certificate, and that would be signed. You would be then at that point that you have completed the OMA and the APRA training. So it's really important. I will email these to you after, or at least by tomorrow morning, and you can go ahead and get started with these trainings, watch them. Once you've completed, let me know, and I will send you a certificate that you have completed the trainings. And then just save that certificate for any future things. If for any reason OMA or APRA come up as something important, you would have that certificate on hand. So the last one here is about the Rhode Island ethics and financial disclosure. So you might wonder, a lot of information about, this information and who it covers. So it covers you, the commissioners, volunteers, staff, and also your relatives and others who work for the state. So if you have left your job and your term is over, then it's still in effect for 1 year. If there's any reason for conflict of interest, or your relative works at a particular state agency, there can be no conflict of interest for 1 year. After that 1 year is passed, then that is no longer in effect. So also there has to be the disclosure annually that needs to be filled out, that there is no conflict of interest. There's no, nothing backhanded happening. There's no violations. There has to be a signature that the ethics committee has gathered for all of Rhode Island, that there's no conflict of interest. So you might be asking a little bit more about what's unethical: accepting other related employment, any information sharing that's confidential, using your position for monetary gain for self, family, or business, or, working out deals for votes and, accepting gifts or rewards or a future job that you want to work at a specific agency and, trying to work out a deal where you would get a job there in replacements or from votes, any of that kind of thing would be considered unethical. So I'm going to send you a Rhode Island ethics PowerPoint for your training as well, so you can look over that. And once you've received that form, you can sign that annually and every year that you're on the commission. Of course, if you leave the commission, it's still in effect for just that 1 year. And then after that, it's not in effect. So now I know Shane is left, so I'll go ahead and describe this, but in the next 2 meetings, I'm going to explain what they're going to look like. But the Board of Commissioner composition, specific roles and responsibilities of the commissioners. And there's 4 things particularly regarding employment. There's 4 committees: the accessibility, employment, and what education and what their roles are for all of those committees and how they relate to the commissioners and the staff. Understanding how all that connectivity is and what areas they all cover in their areas of responsibility. So Shane Feldman will be discussing that at our next board meeting. So right now, looking at the governance functions for maximum impact and wanting to provide training, and we'll do that at the next meeting, and also the communications and transparency, which is extremely vital. And then the plan to develop short-term strategy and priorities to measure progress. I think the goal at this point would be, I think there are 2 or 3 board members next week, and then 2 weeks after that. So there's a short-term plan for strategies. So we'll be discussing that. And then after that, there we are. So I know we're coming really close to the end of time, but if any of you have any questions, feel free to email me, any suggestions or feedback, and any bit how this orientation benefited you. Is there anything that you learned, some new information? And lastly, how often should we provide an orientation? Is this something you think we should do annually or every 2 years, anytime a new commissioner comes? I think feel free to email you your thoughts on that. If you want to hold the questions to the next meeting, we can also do that. But that's it for my presentation, and hopefully you enjoyed getting all of this information about the various projects and from everybody who presented about their project. And thank you, Bethany, for all of that, for interpreter, for CART, Bethany for running everything, everyone for your presentation, and for all of you in the audience who've been in attendance this whole time and making your comments and being here as well. So just wrapping up at this point, if there are any further questions, I know we have just a few more minutes on the clock, but I'm going to stop sharing and feel free to ask your questions.
Betsy?
Yeah. 2 questions. One is if I've done the open meeting.
One
Hold on
moment,
just
sorry.
a second. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay. I have done the APRA training and the Open Meeting Acts training, but not in the last year. How often? I don't think I've done that every year. I've done it occasionally. Does that have to be done every year?
I need to check that myself. I don't know if it's annually or if you just take it once you're on the commission. I don't think you have to take it again.
Okay,
I don't believe so, but we can check that more.
that'd be good. And the second point is that tonight was a very long meeting with a lot of details. And as secretary, I'm just going to do it in very broad strokes, very broad strokes. These are the topics that were covered. I can't do all of the details of history and budgets. And I think, if I will send you the minutes, if you need it more detailed, let me know. But if it needs to be very, very detailed, I would need help with transcribing the meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Betsy. Tim, did you have something? Yes, I just wanted to say with the APRA, if somebody says they want a copy of a document, and it gets to the staff, then there's a form that they can fill out. And that form is created a few years ago to specifically talk about exemptions, things that we do not have to provide, because we might have some collection of information. We give it to our lawyer and the lawyer says this can be redacted. You don't need to share that information. There's parts that you would, remove from review. So it's a long process. It's not like you just hand over whatever is being requested. Thank you for clarifying that, Tim. Yes, Caroline?
So I have two things. Betsy, if you need help with the notes, let me know. I'm here. And I know that I went through the ethics training and I'm pretty sure some other people have too. So that's my question is, do I need to do it again, or is it one time is good for my entire time as a commissioner? So if you could check that out, I'd really appreciate it.
I will check the ethics, whether it's, yes, an OMA and APRA. Those are the three. I'll find out and I'll email. Thank you for those questions. I'll email everybody the answer to that. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to say thank you so much for your attention, your time. I know it was a long orientation, but it's very valuable information. I really appreciate the staff giving the history of their departments and what the roles and responsibilities were for, and thank you for the interpreters. I know it was a really long meeting, for the CART reporter as well, for staying with us. And thanks for everybody from the public who showed up to watch. It will be recorded and there's a transcript. So if there's anything that's being missed, you can certainly get that, especially the information that I'm going to be sending for the PowerPoints with the hot links for the OMA and the APRA. And then once you finish the ethics training, you can get a certificate of completion. And I will check to make sure those three things, ethics, OMA, and APRA, are not needed to do every year. And happy St. Patrick's Day. Everybody can turn on your video just to say goodbye and we'll sign off. Yes, let's open up our videos. We can all see each other. Good night, everybody. Good night. Yes, good night. Take care.